So today is Saturday, July 7th, 2018. Uh, and I had thought that we would begin a new series of Teishos today. I'd like to read from Before Buddha Was Buddha, my recent book, um, uh, and explore that a bit, maybe do some commenting and some shosan, that is, period, chance to question things that I say in there. But I'd like to begin our looking at the Jatakas with examining a koan for today, again from Hekigon Roku. And you'll see when we get to it what it is. So let's begin. Is there a point to Zen practice? Is there an image or archetype that reasonably sums it up? So actually, there are three traditional images that, taken together, might do the job. The first is the Buddha sitting beneath the Bodhi tree. We enter the Zendo and bow. We are entering a space dedicated to realizing our deepest purpose. Why was I born? Why must I die? Why am I alive here, now, on this earth? Then we walk to our mat or chair and bow to our seat. We are about to be like the Buddha taking his seat beneath the tree. We too will sit now at the axis mundi, the center post of the world, just as the Buddha did when he sat beneath the Bodhi tree and announced, though only my skin, sinews, and bones remain, I will not stir from this spot until I have realized full enlightenment. So that myth and that experience are renewed every time we sit. This is the fundamental experience of letting go self-centeredness and finding confirmation by the morning star, the noisy air conditioner, the crow's caw, the drip and slide of sweat. The second image is Manjushri swinging a delusion-cutting sword. Manjushri, of course, sits in our Zendo to the right of the Buddha. This is an image of the work of practice, Manjushri Bodhisattva, of the effort to actually go against the habitual, often seemingly endless flow of thoughts, habits, internal dreams, not to stop it, but to see through it, to cleanse that stream and make it transparent. It is the vigorous effort of waking up. The Zen metaphor is of a carp, we might think salmon in North America, that keeps at it, keeps trying to leap up the waterfall against the flow of the current, trying and trying until finally succeeding, it becomes the dragon it has always really been. But until it made that leap, it just didn't know that it was. Robert Bly said in a workshop I was in with him years ago, I've mentioned this before, if you just go with the flow, you always end up in the bleeping Gulf of Mexico. That is, we end up going where we always have ended up, back in the same old places we're already sick to death of. We have to go against the flow. So we count this breath. We experience this breath. We raise the central point of a koan inquiry, look deeply into an inquiry like who is hearing, or other inquiry, and we do it now. Manjushri Bodhisattva swings the delusion-cutting sword, the sword that cuts in one. This is the embodiment of continuous, persistent, unflagging work, the work of practice. So he is traditionally the patron, the encouraging bodhisattva of all traditional zendos, where he is also, as we know, may sit on a lion, the noble, courageous nature that is our own nature when duality's illusion falls even temporarily away. So that's on the right side of the Buddha altar. You'll see Manjushri Bodhisattva holding a sword, also a small one seated on a lion holding a sword. This is an image of the work of practice. The Buddha sitting is the image of the taking our place, vowing to realize the essential mind, the mind that sees, colors, with the eyes, hears sounds with the ears, thinks thoughts with the brain, feels with the body, tastes with the tongue. The third image is that of the Bodhisattva of compassion, especially the Bodhisattva with 11 heads and 1,000 hands. This is Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva of endless, limitless, unimaginably functioning compassion. This image expresses what the core experience and constant work of attention opens. Manjushri is fulfilled as Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva of active compassion. Compassionate action is the point, we might say, of dropping the self in zazen. What flows from insight is the practice of ordinary life, of functioning and maturing in the world of differentiation, the so-called world of 10,000 things. So to the left of the Buddha altar, you'll see an image of the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara with 11 heads, looking in every direction. Also a relaxed Bodhisattva, and we'll talk about this. Avalokiteshvara, hearer of the cries of the world, is the female Kannon in Japan, Kuan Yin in China, the male Chenrezigs in Tibet. All are forms of the greatly compassionate one, all figures embodying wisdom's compassion, compassion's wisdom. Tara, or the Savioress in Tibet, is said to have emerged from a teardrop that fell from the eye of the Bodhisattva of Avalokiteshvara, when at last he saw our world's sorrows so very clearly. She is the essence of purest compassion. In ancient Japan, the 1,000-armed and 11-headed form of the Bodhisattva of compassion, known as Senju Kannon, is held to be especially sacred. The Lotus Sutra has a whole chapter dedicated to revealing the miraculous saving virtue of calling on the Bodhisattva of compassion in times of grave danger and trial. He or she is eternally ready to step in to help us face such times. Eternal, selfless, pure, as the chant we do, the Kanzeon, that mind, eternal, selfless, pure, is the mind of Kuan Yin, Kannon, Avalokiteshvara. According to the Shurangama Sutra, the Bodhisattva of Avalokiteshvara was a man at the time of the Buddha. His practice was inquiring into who is hearing. By this path, he opened fully into deep, selfless wisdom and compassion. In many of his or her iconographic forms, the great Bodhisattva, especially as Kuan Yin or Kannon, is often still shown in this way: 2 hands, 1 head. Sometimes she holds a vase pointed up, often like this, retaining the benefits of practice for the welfare of all. Sometimes the vase is pointed like this, upside down, pouring out. She is then manifesting the benefit of her practice, selflessly pouring healing balm onto the troubled waters of life on this planet Earth. The Shurangama Sutra says that by going deep into his practice of who is hearing, the Bodhisattva of Avalokiteshvara realized complete and selfless freedom. Then he compassionately vowed to save all beings, endlessly, throughout all space and all time. He became then the one who hears the cries of the world, or, as another translation of the name puts it, the Lord who looks down from on high. A Buddhist legend says that he worked to fulfill this great vow and had indeed, after eons of dedicated work, emptied all the hells of all suffering beings. Then, an instant later, he was overwhelmed to find that in only that tiny speck of time, an instant or a minute, after he had emptied the hells, all the hells were completely filled again. 2 hands and 1 head would not be enough. Out of this failure, and out of deepest compassion, his head split into 11 heads, so he could look in all directions, wherever any being might be suffering. His arms split into 1,000 arms, each with an open eye in the palm. Now he could reach wisely and effectively into any realm to save any suffering being. The eye in the palm is crucial. Without wisdom's open eye, compassion could be mere sentimentality and could easily create a path to hell, paved with 1,000 good intentions. I will save all others could be the worst sort of ego trap. But now, with all these hands and eyes, he or she could really get down to the endless work. But note, this great compassion is released by failure, the innate inability to ever fully fulfill the great vow to save all beings. There is a truth here we should not overlook. Enlightenment itself is this great failure. The isolated, self-centered self, like London Bridge, falls down. The Hekigan-roku, or Blue Cliff Record, is the second, again, I've mentioned this last week, central koan collection we work on after Wumenkwan, or Mumenkan in Japanese, the gateless barrier in our lineage. It was put together about 1,000 years ago in China by Zen Master Shuido, Secho in Japanese, and refined and expanded about 60 years after that by Master Wanwu Engo in Japanese. Now, in koan 89 of the Hekigan-roku, Blue Cliff Record, two mature Zen masters have some fun, tossing the Dharma back and forth, creating the ball and the mitts to catch it as they throw. Here's the case, number 89, Hekigan-roku, Yunyen's hands and eyes. Yunyen, Ungon in Japanese, as Dawu, Dogo in Japanese. How does the Bodhisattva of great compassion use all those many hands and eyes? Dawu answered, it's like a man in the middle of the night reaching or groping behind his head for his pillow. Yunyen said, I understand. Another translation says, I get it, I get it. Dawu said, how do you understand it? Yunyen said, the whole body is hand and eye. Another translation says, all over the body are hands and eyes. Dawu said, that is very well expressed, but it is only 8/10 of the answer. Yunyen said, how would you say it, elder brother? Dawu said, throughout the body are hands and eyes. Now, we met Dawu Dogo last week. He was asked alive or dead, and his response was, I won't say alive, I won't say dead. He and Yunyen were Zen friends and enjoyed exploring the Dharma by skillfully challenging one another. Now, something I've mentioned many times before, on pilgrimage in China in 2006, Rose and I went to the temple of the Great Tang era, that's 900 AD or so, Zen Master Linji Rinzai in Japan. In the Dharma hall where he gave his Teishos, there was a huge figure, 20, 30 feet high, painted red, blue, gold, of 1,000-armed, 11-headed Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva of compassion. This was the backdrop, he sat in front of it, to Rinzai's, or Linji's, strong Zen words, his shouts and blows, the no-holds-barred dynamic Zen, for which he was particularly known. 1,000 compassionate helping hands was what it was all about for Linji, one of the great masters of the golden age of Tang, the Tang dynasty. Now, Linji was vigorous in his embodiment of the way, taking no prisoners, killing delusions, telling us to cut down Buddhas, kill Buddhas, should they arise as something outside our own nature. And yet, the context of his fiercely dramatic teaching was a commitment to deepest compassion, as the huge 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara that was in his temple shows. The sword of wisdom kills delusions and gives life, real life. reading only the text, the record of Linchi's Zen encounters and talks, we'd never notice this. It's one problem of book Zen. But being there, actually seeing it, we got it. Our four eyes opened. Rinzai had been using countless hands. Though concepts and ideas come along as we find our way in Zen tradition, we are not on a path of learning. Of course, there's certain basic concepts we learn as practice. We learn what words like Doksan and Teisho mean. We learn what Mahayana, great way, means. We learn certain concepts that come out of India, China, and Japan. That's true. But Zen itself is not a path of learning. Zazen is about personally realizing what concepts are about. Yasutani Roshi in the Three Pillars of Zen says in one of his introductory talks on Zen practice that all Buddhist philosophy, even the loftiest and most abstruse, is simply a verbal expression of what is realized in Zazen. Of course, there's deeper Zazen and more shallow Zazen. Through Zazen and through the koan curriculum, we ourselves can awake to the path that is even now under our feet, before our eyes, within reach of our hands. Where is this koan, this story? How does the Bodhisattva use all those hands and eyes? This dialogue turn our attention. What is this koan here to help us realize? Compassion, sure, that's clear. But how does compassion actually function? How does the great Bodhisattva of compassion use all those hands and eyes? What's the purpose of so many hands and eyes? How many places can you see and interact with at one time? How many activities can you engage in at one time? Isn't Zen about being right here with this cloud, this pain in the knee, this person, this ring of the phone? Isn't multitasking not Zen? Isn't this why we start practicing to focus and really be here, not everywhere and all over the place? Compassion is not a thought, nor is it the injunction, I should be kind. It is not an effort of will, not note to self, be more compassionate. Try it. Good luck. Compassionate activity is the great Bodhisattva's whole aim, to do whatever is needed for the sake not just of the righteous, but the unrighteous as well. For horses, slugs, and worms, sparrows, eagles, and vultures, lambs and tigers, paramecium and spiders. How does the Bodhisattva make use of his or her great vow to save the many beings? How does he or she actualize and make real that deepest, innate, most intimate commitment to save the many beings? How can you see clearly when you have eyes all over the place? What do you focus on? Emails are coming every day asking the Bodhisattva to sign this petition, attend this rally, donate to this or that campaign. What should she do? How can she not end up paralyzed when in her 1,000 arms are not just pillows, but ropes, hatchets, computers, iPads, cell phones, shovels, swords, pens, crayons, chisels, life preservers, juice boxes, vitamins? How to use all those arms, all those eyes, all those possibilities, and why? Compassion is not simple kindness. Kindness, of course, is wonderful, yet kindness can be deeply dualistic. I will help you. Compassion is not blind feeling, but an expression of wisdom. Hence those open eyes in the palm of every hand. Compassion is more even than empathy, for it is simultaneously action, not just feeling, but it is not forced. It arises when we get out of the way. It is not conscious in a self-conscious way. Eyes see, hands do. The point of Kanon's practice is not simply seeing self-nature, not simply awakening, though that is an important moment, no mistaking. It is not about having a momentary awakening and abiding with or holding on to whatever we might have gained. After 6 years of effort, the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree doing zazen. In the morning, he glanced up at the morning star and experienced the complete dropping away of self-centeredness. In that moment, he actualized the complete potential of mind, and not brain, not thought, not mind with the small m, but mind, the capital M, and owned the results of all his previous efforts, all his lifetimes of work, as presented in the Jataka tales. He knew complete freedom, complete peace, and tradition says at that moment he thought, it's so simple and clear, there is no way to teach this. Everyone already has it. They just don't know it. Then for 3 weeks, he sat absorbed in the bliss of his experience, and then he realized that that vast, empty, fully realized, awake and peaceful sitting wasn't yet it. To get past that wonderfully stuck place of completely realized yet still incomplete practice, he got back up and started walking the dusty roads of India. And from that day, when he was 30 or so, until his death at 85, he never stopped teaching. The failure, as Wu Men says in another context, in a verse in the Wu Men Quan, Gateless Barrier, that failure is wonderful indeed. Our job in practice is not simply to gain our own bit of peace, but to actualize an ordinary life of practice realization, whereas maturing human beings with jobs, family, friends, shortcomings, issues, we can begin to function less self-centeredly and more selflessly, which does not mean vaguely acting for family, friends, environment, nation, and all beings. How? How do we know how to raise our hand? How do we blink or digest a meal? How do we hear or think or taste? We are a hand reaching for a pillow in the night. In a dark cloud of unknowing, as one Christian mystic termed it. This is our life. Seeing is acting if we don't suppress and cut off the activity that arises. I see that this is important, we may say, and I'll do it, whatever that important it may be. Set a time to sit, go to sesshin, apologize to a friend, visit a neighbor, whatever. But then the time comes, and somehow we dither. Next time, or it's not convenient right now, or fill in the blank yourself. And we fall back into the ancient habit of putting up a wall, separating eyes and hands, committing to myself locked in here and you, all of you, forever out there. And the ancient, seemingly solid, painful alienation again claims us. Once more we find ourselves on our old road of dukkha, a Sanskrit word that suggests not simply suffering, but the wobbling and groaning of a wheel not turning smoothly on its axis, but rubbing unevenly as it turns round and round. Dukkha so doesn't mean just suffering. It means we're always off, always that off feeling. Things keep going off. Grinds. It's not smooth running. Let's accept from the start that this will be a lifetime's work, this work of maturing, and it is never complete, never done. And no one is perfect at it. No one is perfect to start with. No one is perfect at the end. Even the Buddha to be, as the Jatakas show, had his own struggles and had to make efforts against the riptide pull of old, destructive habits. And then, even when he was the Buddha, the fully awakened one, completely realized he still had to leave his newfound comfort zone of perfect realization and perfect peace to walk the dusty roads, doing his best to embody the ancient way that he'd realized and teach others. His way of maturing further was to get up, keep going, and help others realize what they already had in equal measure. What is it to wake in the middle of the night? What is night? Does the darkness have to do with something good or something bad? What is it? Through the day, konzeon. Through the night, konzeon. That's how that chant goes. It's like waking in the middle of the night and reaching back or groping for your pillow. That's what the koan case says. That's how the Bodhisattva uses all those hands and eyes. Reaching back for a pillow in the night. Is that different from raising children, going to work, buying groceries, lifting the phone? Our whole life is a series of opportunities for allowing the self to become porous, a chance to evolve further by dropping our interior wall, that is, seeing through the limiting concept of an inner self and external others, and all that goes with it, the so-called whole catastrophe we know too well of a violent and suffering world. Our daily job is to do our best to awake to the reality of non-dualistic intimacy with all things, and then not to rest with that, but to express that realization as an ordinary life as best we can. We will fail at this many times. Still, it all comes back to the core of practice, Zazen itself, and a basic willingness to let go of our own habitual self-centeredness, or at least a curiosity to see what is it really? What is this self really? This is the meaning of faith, to accept somewhere that the cut-off, isolated self is not all that we are. Upon his great enlightenment, the Buddha proclaimed, "Wonder of wonders, all beings are Buddhas, fully endowed with wisdom and compassion. Only their delusions prevent them from attesting to this." By paying attention in Zazen, we allow unused eyes to open. We start flexing 1,000 hands. We find that we don't have to glue all those many arms on one by one like so many merit badges. Rather, seeing into the self, studying the self, facing the self, and then forgetting the self, we discover the 1,000 hands that have always been here, always been ours. Zen Master Dogen, in the now famous section of Shobogenzo, Eye of the Treasury of the True Dharma, the section is Genjo Koan, actualizing the fundamental point, lays it out clearly. To study the way, said Dogen back in 13th century Japan, is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to drop clinging to one's own body and mind, and drop clinging to the bodies and minds of others. To drop attachment, leave all traces of clinging to a habitual concept of body and mind, is to be enlightened by all things. And this traceless enlightenment of deepening intimacy continues endlessly. He also said, in light of this, when the self goes forward to become one with the 10,000 things, it's called delusion. When the 10,000 things step in and are us, wipe us away, this is intimacy, or realization, or enlightenment. To forget the self is not to suppress or ignore it. Zen practice asks us to really look into our deepest assumptions of what and who and where we are. Ultimately, the practice is personal. What is this very self that listens to this Teisho right now? What is this self that practices? What is this self that wants enlightenment? Where is this self? If the brain is operated on, they never find something called the self in there. Where is this self? If we keep at it, we begin to see that our sorrow is that we live in a dream, believing ourselves to be separate from other selves. Of course, in a sense, provisionally, this is so, yet this is ultimately a delusive view, one that causes endless suffering. The root cause of war, environmental destruction, and the whole personal shopping list of entrenched egotism that inevitably results from a deeply felt separation and inability to live intimately among stars, bugs, friends, parents, children, mountains, rivers on this great wide earth. Please, don't take my word for it. That intimacy with trees and stars and rivers, mountains, people, sidewalks, and bugs is not simply to be wished for, but is our real condition. Find out for yourself. If I'm wrong, there's a way to know it. If I'm accurate, there's a way to know it. How? Keep practicing and find out the truth or falsity for yourself. Dropping self-centeredness opens a gateless gate. Then Avalokiteshvara, hearer of the cries of the world, can, with 1,000 wise hands, apply balm on wounds, pour water on drying plants, employ rope to tie up and restrain wild egotism, swing a sword to cut off self-centered habits of body and mind. Compassion might not always be sweet. At times a rope to tie up egocentric actions or a sword to cut off self-centered thinking might be what's needed. Nor does saving imply some form of missionary zeal. It has nothing to do with ringing doorbells, handing out pamphlets, and converting others. It is not a self-help or other help program. It is not neither, nor is it both. How does saving or freeing beings take place? The first vow of all bodhisattvas, beginners like us to most advanced, is to save the many beings. How do you save all beings? How does the bodhisattva, whose whole career is geared to do that, manage it? Is it even possible? Or is it just an aspiration repeated to remind us to be compassionate and kind? How does she know how to use all those hands and eyes? How do you know? Again, Dogen says to study the way, or practice the way, is to study the self. To study the self, if you look carefully, is to forget the self. Why? You won't find a self. Look as hard as you want. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to stop putting all the demands of the self onto everyone around us. It is to free others from ourselves as well as releasing birds to the air, bugs to the soil, flowers to the spring. Freeing ourselves is a path of freeing all. It sounds immense, but it comes down to counting this breath. 1, 2, 3. It comes down to experiencing this very breath. It comes down to questioning completely who is hearing. Who is hearing the air conditioner? Who is hearing these words? It comes down to absorption in one single koan point. This is dropping the self, forgetting the self. Put another way, dropping self-centeredness is liberating all beings, or can be, at the least. Every step we take in that direction has its own value. Of course, we must also face the reality that it can never fully be done. Or if you want, don't forget the self. Hold to it tight as you can. See if it is solid as we unconsciously believe or are led to believe that it is. Try. Go on. Try to find it. Search and search. What do we find? Birdsong, pain in knees, itchy nose, thoughts, feelings, sensations, sights, sounds, taste, touch, smells. Is there anything more? Is there nothing more? Where is myself? Are these many hands and eyes? Is all there is hands and eyes? How does the Bodhisattva use all those hands and eyes? Wait, what Bodhisattva are we talking about? Where is the Bodhisattva? Again, Zen Master Dogen in his section on this koan in Shobogenzo, Eye of the Treasury of the True Dharma, his masterwork from 1200 or so AD, which was lost, by the way, for the next 500 years, was only found in the 1700s, only known, I guess, in manuscript in maybe one of the Soto head temples, and only really refound and then published around 1700. 500 years it was unknown. Anyway, in his section on this koan, he turns the whole thing around and asks, how do hands and eyes use all those bodhisattvas? How do hands and eyes use all those bodhisattvas? Yunyan said in the case, to get back to it, I get it, or I understand. Was he saying, sure, I understand? Or was he saying, aha, now I get it? Yet, what is there to get? If we are whole and complete from the start, as the Buddha exclaimed upon his great enlightenment, wonder of wonders, all beings are Buddha, that is fully endowed with all the wisdom and all the virtue and all the compassion in the universe. Every being, how much more whole and complete can we become? Yet if we are whole and complete, why don't we know it? Why don't we experience it right now? If this is who we really are, why do we have to work so hard and persistently to realize it? Why do we feel so often so alone and afraid? That question gave Dogen no peace, himself no peace. And yet it was that no peace, that painful doubt, that in the end opened up his path to the great peace of full enlightenment, full realization. What is the relation of seeing to doing, of insight to action, of quiet zazen to complex lives? Is that our aim, to be quiet? Or is that just the beginning of being able to do what exactly? How does this work? It's like reaching back for a pillow in the night, says Tao Wu. That sounds easy enough. But what is it really asking us to be able to do in our life? It's like reaching back for a pillow in the night. What is that really asking us to be able to do? And what about those answers about all those hands and eyes? Are they different? Are they the same? Is one position more complete? Hands and eyes and hands, all over the body, throughout the body. Is one answer better than the other? Is there a point, or are these two old guys just being too clever? Why are both hands and eyes even mentioned? What are hands? What are eyes? Do hands arise from eyes? Do eyes arise in hands? And what is that 8/10? Where he says, that's not bad, but it's only 8/10. Does 80% mean not good enough? Zen Master Dogen, in commenting on this koan, says, if real criticism had been implied, Tao Wu wouldn't have said, you answer well, but it's 80%. Instead, he would have said, that's 80%. What does that response mean? This too we must clarify in responding to this koan. If we're not lost in our heads, going over the ache of unhealed wounds, planning new and more successful responses, working on self-centered, even self-aggrandizing schemes. Then, when our friend slips on the ice, our hand reaches out to steady her. If a ball is overthrown, then, before a child runs out into traffic to grab it, we catch it and throw it back, all without a thought. The phone rings and we say, "Hello?" This is our life. This is the so-called point of practice, to live this. Being less here, we can be more here than ever, and more appropriately do or not do as the situation requires. This is where our great vows have life, in the complex, frustrating, imperfect mix of our ordinary life. Yamada Roshi says that the point of practice is the maturing of character. This doesn't happen by willing ourselves into a more mature version of ourselves. It happens by losing ourselves, that is, by losing the self-consciousness that stands like a veil between us and all things, even things and people we hold most dear. It means dropping the whole self-centered deal by focusing so fully on this moment of practice that the ancient, isolated concept of self momentarily fades or falls away. In that instant, we touch base with the essential nature of all natures, human and non-human alike, which is simultaneously no nature at all and our own so often missing quintessential humanity, starting to see and act from this less self-centered center. This is how we begin to mature. It is not straightforward. An old Japanese folk saying goes, 7 times down, 8 times up. Such is life. The practice of getting to the top of the mountain of Zen, they say, isn't all that difficult. That is, the work of getting to that ultimate non-self-centered view is hard, of course, but if you keep climbing, keep persisting, keep falling back and then going on again, slowly you find yourself gaining some understanding, some strength and skill, facing obstacles, dealing with rock sides, crevices, sheer cliffs and storms. Something deepens. Sometimes the mountain is hidden by clouds and mists. Other times your way is sunny and clear. You just keep going, doing whatever works for where you are. One day, you may find the top is right under your feet. You hardly know how you got there. Hardly believe you've arrived. You stand up, awed, look around, look out over vast, vast space. What a view! It's all clear. Everything. Still, great as this is, you find you can't live up there. The mountaintop view is vast, but the top of the peak is empty and bare. There's nothing up there. No one to help. No one to do the helping. So after a bit, you gather your gear and you start back down. And that's when and how you discover that descending the mountain, that's what's endless. How does the Bodhisattva use all those hands and eyes? Is never ending. Stay with the practice. Stay with the breath. Stay with the koan or inquiry. When the Bodhisattva wakes in the night, you can hand her the pillow yourself. Ripeness, to quote the bard, ripeness is all